One, two, three, four. Beep, 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 beep. Do bop, 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 beep, bleh. Blah, 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 blah. If I turn this way, oh, now you can see the microphone. I would first like to extend my most sincere and home-felt apologies for the poor sound quality on this here internet program. I thought the mic wasn't working, so I took it out, and then apparently the mic on the laptop is even worse. But also, if I sit over here like I normally like to, this goddamn thing, I mean, I guess it'll reach if I wanted to, but then I look like Dr. Johnny Fever. Well, I guess there's no downside. I mean, why wouldn't you want to look like Howard Hessman with my hair still, though? Anyway, we gotta go sit in the lobby and wait for the limousine for picks of the week. My daily Spinal Tap reference. Mark that down. Why aren't you standing over here? All right. I'm sorry. I walked in, and my computer had done that thing where it restarts and updates, and then it had signed me out of my Google Drive, so I panic. It's nothing that I had left open. I don't know about you, but I leave 50 or 60 tabs open in Chrome alone, much less the 9 or 10 writing things I've got going. And, ugh. So that's fun. Walk in the door and have to do the fucking. Alright, sorry. Try not to swear. First up this week, I got Midnight Suns #1. Notice the spelling. So back in the 90s, when Ghost Rider was very popular, the Marvel raced to fill out the rest of their horror line, which they hadn't had since the 70s. And they launched, like, Blade got his own title, I think, in the Midnight Suns. He was on the Night Stalkers, which also got their own book, which did not even last a year, I don't think. They gave Ghost Rider a second title, Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider, Spirits of Vengeance, which I also read and liked. I was a big Ghost Rider guy. I mean, I was a teenage boy, so obviously I was going to be into that sort of thing. And then they had, I think that was it for Morbius. Morbius is also part of the Midnight Suns, right? Oh, and Darkhold had its own title. Yeah, so they weren't very good. Was Terror Inc. might have been part of the Midnight Suns, but I don't think so. They also had a quarterly anthology book called Midnight Suns Quarterly, which I also like. Marvel anthologies are usually pretty fun to me. But those are all sons as in, not daughters. This is sons as in sons. And you have Blade, you have Ghost Rider. I think this is actually Spirit Rider. And then, yeah, there's, those are the only original Midnight Suns. And then Wolverine. Magic makes sense, because she's a superhero, but her powers are kind of in the horror genre. She's the Queen of Limbo, or she was the Queen of Limbo. Now Madeline Pryor, the Goblin Queen, is. I also, now that I'm thinking about this, I realize that one of my coworkers was reading this today and asking me questions about it as though I had read it. I'm going to have a chat with that young lady. I don't really know what this is, though. I'm assuming it's another teen book. I mean, it is spooky season for all you hacks. I don't know if I've gone on this particular rant on here. It's not a rant so much, but it's always kind of... I love Halloween. I love the horror genre. But always around this time of year when the Spirit Halloween stores start opening back up and shit like that, and they start running, on TV, they'll start 31 days of horror, and it's like, you can watch scary movies really anytime. My life is a fucking horror. So I don't need to keep it to early fall. I can go ahead and... So, yeah. that's what I believe. This is going to be a team book in that vein of like Night Stalkers or what other. They did a Spirits of Vengeance mini a year or two ago. That was like a team book. There's a big like horror team, Legion of Monsters. That's not what I was trying to think of. Legion of Monsters, I believe, was a book in the '70s, which had all the '70s monsters, Werewolf by Night, and the Living Zombie or the Living Mummy. Yeah, or is it Living? I can't remember now. And I believe Frankenstein was in Legion of Monsters. Both Marvel and DC have a Frankenstein's monster because that character's in public domain. Same with Dracula, I believe. I know Marvel has Dracula. I'm not sure that DC does, to be honest with you. Man, this is my pick. Okay. And in that same vein, I also got Sergeant Werewolf #1. This is from the Black Caravan Press, the smaller indie company. It's done by Rich Woodall, who they put his name at the top. So I was like, oh, do I? And I looked him up, and he's co-founder of Black Caravan Press. So that's why he gets his name at the top. But yeah, what do you want? It's Sergeant Werewolf. It's a World War II werewolf story. Sergeant Werewolf discovers that the Nazis are trying to summon the god Thor in their battle against the world. And so Sergeant Werewolf is not going to put up with that. Certainly not on a full moon. I'll tell you that much. For picks of the week. Picks of last week. I'm just saying, look, I get excited for Halloween and stuff too. And I like that there's more decorations out and stuff like that. But also, I just like it all the time. If my house was just like 1313 Mockingbird Lane, I would be fine with that. I'm not a goth, oddly. I do have goth sensibilities. I'm like a punk goth, like the Cramps and the Damned. Anyway. I'm all caught up on my funny books, so that's something. Alien #1. No need for this to be a #1 at all. Nope. Not even kind of. I mean, in the very first arc, we follow the adventures of Gabriel Cruz, who I think was a character in Aliens, but I couldn't swear to that. But that was like the tie-in to the film franchise. And then the next arc took place on that arc took place on Earth. The next arc took place on a colony world, and then this one also does. But they don't directly tie in, but they all get mentioned. So again, it's just like, oh right, we're gonna just, oh right, this is a fun premise. This is something I haven't seen Alien do. I haven't seen any comics do, certainly not any of the movies. But in this story, we meet a team of, what do they call androids in the Alien franchise? You know, like Lance Henriksen in the second movie. Excuse me. While I kiss the sky. But centerfold's loose, Marvel. I want to get a new staple guy. So the I want to keep calling them replicants, but that's Blade Runner, right? Synthetics, is that what they call them? I'm sorry. I know it's really fun to watch a guy on YouTube looking at a comic book. There's a team of androids, cyborgs. No, I think androids is the proper term. Who are, were once upon a time owned by Weyland-Yutani, the company. And it's intimated, it's implied that they had been on a mission gone wrong years previous, I would imagine to do with the xenomorphs. And so they have left They've got their own colony now on another planet, distant planet. They don't want anything to do with nothing. So the army shows up, though, the Marines. I think, yeah, the Colonial Marines show up, and they want them to go on one last mission. I'm honestly, I don't know, thank you for not lying, Jimmy. I'm very into the pretty hackneyed premise of One Last Job. That's always fun to me. There's never a One Last Job story that I won't at least be like, It always goes sideways and never works out perfectly. It's maybe that's it. It's just like it's instant conflict. When the hero has the call to adventure, the reluctant hero is more interesting. And I think I have Hero with 1,000 Faces, but I've never actually read it. But I've, read synopses of it time and again. And I think that is part of Campbell's whole thing, is that there's the call to adventure, and then the hero doesn't want to answer it, and then he does. But, anyway, sorry. Sidebar. I also read All Out Avengers, #1. I think I might have said as much last week, but Tom Brevoort, the editor, makes as much plain. All Out Avengers is a pretty much, not a spin-off, but in the same spirit as Nonstop Spider-Man, which was a book they started last year, specifically just to have a Spider-Man story where you didn't have to know the continuity. The thing about Spider-Man especially, Spider-Man has always been, before it's a superhero comic, it's always been a soap opera. It's always been a troubled teenager dealing with school and girls and, his aunt and uncle, his parents, basically, and all that sort of thing, a job, and his shitty boss. And then, after high school, he's in college and the same thing. And, it's Amazing Spider-Man has always been the story of Peter Parker more than it is the story of Spider-Man. So they were like, well, why don't we do a book where there's just action? And it was pretty good. Chris Bachalo drew it, and I really liked it. They made it into Savage Spider-Man, which I didn't like as much, but I did read just because I wanted to see how it ended. Because Nonstop Spider-Man ends on a big cliffhanger, and then it becomes Savage Spider-Man. All Out Avengers is the same thing. They were like, why don't we just do an Avengers book where there's just wall-to-wall action? And that's exactly what they supplied. And I'm into it. I don't know. I mean, he made it sound like it was going to be a monthly, like a third monthly Avengers title. But if it makes it past 4 issues, I'd be very surprised. I mean, I hope it goes to 900, like all of them, but they never do. It's still pretty good. And I also read Antioch #1. Now this, as I was saying last week, was a spin-off from Frontiersman, and this character, Antioch, is a hero in the same universe, but he's not directly connected to Frontiersman. But Frontiersman shows up for a big chunk of this book. And I think Antioch breaks him out of jail. Is that? Maybe I should have said spoiler alert. Yeah. I believe that's what... I think they were being a little coy, marketing-wise. They were like, this is a new title. It's tied into Frontiersman, but it's not a continuation. And I think it might actually... The one I was reading, I'm like, I think this is a continuation. It's just kind of shifted the POV. Because now you have this Antioch character who's like this exiled prince or something like that. Space prince. Exiled prince of space. And, but he's endeavoring to help Frontiersmen. And you'll have to read the rest of the series to find out why and how exactly. I certainly will. Also, I read, a bunch of other stuff, but I finally finished this sumbitch. Look at this bad boy. I don't think I showed this when I got it. Starman Compendium Volume 1. Volume 2, the forthcoming... I thought it was going to be out in August, but apparently it was solicited in August. It'll be out in November, I think. But this was a funny book in the 1990s. The Starman started in... It's from DC. This Starman series started in 1994, which was the beginning of my senior year of high school. So this book has always resonated with me, even though once I graduated high school, and not like it just kind of the timing worked out that way. After high school, I just kind of lost interest in comics. It was largely because they were shitty. The mid to late '90s were a terrible time for comics. I enjoy that era now, but at the time I did not. And I was spending more money on records and dates, so to speak. I didn't have a date until I was 19, but from 17, 18 was a rough year for Jim, or it wasn't rough; it was just a dead year. So, but I'd always wanted to go back and read it. This was the book that kind of made James Robinson the name he is today. Starman was originally a Golden Age character, and I believe this was the first book where James Robinson took a Golden Age character and updated it. And this is the original Starman's son is Jack Knight. Ted Knight is the original Starman. But James Robinson is a very fine writer, but his main thing has always been he has a knack for doing that, for taking Golden Age characters, which are most Golden Age comics are not that good. I read them occasionally; they're fun. I love all comics really, but they're not like my go-to. They're very of their time, and just it's similar to Silver Age. Silver Age is a little more exciting to me though, because that's the '60s, and that's when it was. Golden Age, if you're unfamiliar, is from Action Number 1 in 1938 or 9 till the 50s, basically. And that was like, and it's weird to think, but superheroes were just extremely popular. And, the country was in World War II, and so, Captain America's punching Hitler in the face and stuff. And the public at home couldn't get enough of it, and the soldiers overseas also enjoyed it, apparently. I mean, they were pretty easy to read, and you could just, pop them in your rucksack or whatever the hell they call them. But after World War II ended, and I think I've mentioned as much, interest in superheroes just disappeared, basically. Nobody wanted fighting like that anymore. And so it wasn't until the Silver Age, and people, I think mostly Stan Lee, but I think others have attributed the re-popularity of superheroes in the 60s to the Kennedys and Camelot and all that stuff. So it was a time, and it was like the space race, and science fiction was really big, and it was like this, there was a lot of futurism. People were very into the future and what that was going to look like. So I feel like that's, how they've managed to maintain their popularity to this day is, we'll have to ask Joseph Campbell about that. I'm already getting off topic. So Robinson took this character, he updated it. I want to say this was first. I was just looking at it. Ugh. He did this Justice Society Returns, but I want to say this was in the late 90s, after he had already done that with Starman. So, another Golden Age book that James Robinson, I don't think he wrote all of those books, but most. He was like the head writer. He did Airboy a few years ago, which was rather controversial. Airboy is a Golden Age character. I don't remember who published him originally. It might have been Charlton. And he was like a pilot. That sort of, he wasn't super powered at all. He was just a very good pilot. So they called him Airboy, which seems rude. So this was just about, I want to say like about 10 years ago, 2013, 2014 in there. And it was a very meta take on Airboy. But this is what I mean. That, in fact, if you think about it, or if I think about it, that Airboy series is a very good, like, short thumbnail of how James Robinson works. He takes an old Golden Age character, doesn't necessarily update it every time. He did it Starman, but he makes it relevant. And he, applies postmodernism to, stuff like that. Airboy was a story of James Robinson and Cameron Stewart doing an Airboy comic. And so it wasn't about Airboy at all. It was about them. And he kind of got in trouble because he made light. There's like one, like, you know, I don't know how on, I don't know how accurate it was or how much Robinson was playing up his negative qualities, but his character in that book is a real piece of shit. And Cameron, I believe it was Cameron Stewart who drew it, was kind of dragged along for the ride, and so they're partying and stuff. And at one point, James Robinson sleeps with a prostitute, and then the prostitute turns out to be a trans, and so then that's played up for like laughs, and you know, obviously that doesn't fly. I mean, it wasn't like they did it today. They did it at a time where it was right. That was kind of the demarcation. You can't make trans jokes anymore. It's 2013. And I think James Robinson was like, oh, okay, sorry. I don't remember how that played out. They finished the series, though. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. The thing about Starman that I really, really like, that I'm so glad to have this comic book back in my life, and to finally be able to read the entire thing. This is extremely thorough. This is the first 42 issues of Starman, including the Zero issue. It has both the first two annuals, the 80-page giant that they did, the Secret Files and Origins they did, and then even the crossover with Shazam. It has those issues of Shazam. They did a 4-issue crossover. And then they did a couple of stories in the Showcase. DC had an anthology series called Showcase, and there were Starman stories in there. And then the Shade, who had been a Starman villain, becomes not a villain necessarily, but sort of chaotic neutral for my D&D nerds out there. And he had a 4-issue miniseries that is also in here. So the next volume will have, I believe Starman was 84 issues, so it'll have the next 42 issues. And there's another Shade miniseries that was actually kind of recent, like 2011 or something. And I can't wait, frankly. I mean, I guess I can, because it took me a while to get through this. How thick this thing is. And let me just say, on something of a side note, physically this book is great. It's a little hard to read because it's so big, but DC, I remember like 15 years ago, DC's trades and like hardcovers were garbage, so bad. Like the hardcover omnibuses that they would sell, stuff like Kirby and Ditko, the glue would come out of the binding and everything, and shit like that, and they were just overpriced and they looked like garbage. But now they've figured out how to do a big paperback like this, a giant trade. They also have one for the Milestone comics, which was the all black comic book line started by Dwayne McDuffie and Dennis Cowan, among a couple others. But to me, they were always the big two. DC did a compendium like this, where it has there was 4 Milestone series to begin with, and I think it has like the first 10 issues of each or something like that. But it's a really, and this was $60. That's not, I know it seems like a lot to spend on a funny book, but anyway, I'm glad of that. Starman, I started reading this when I got it home, and I messaged my friend Frank, who's the only person I know who would give a shit, and I said, Starman is, I don't remember exactly what it was very clever. Starman, it's very 90s. It's extremely of its time without being dated. That was what I said. It's the most 90s book I think I've ever read. Superhero comic, anyway. But in a good way, for once. Because that's the thing. He doesn't go in for what you got out of the 90s a lot, which was a lot of big giant guns and a bunch of useless, what do they call them? Not pockets, but what do they call those? Look that up. Utility belts all over the place, and just bigger and dumber and stupider. Starman was a real breath of fresh air as far as all that goes. You had the original Starman is Ted Knight. His oldest son, David, takes on the mantle and immediately gets killed. So then it's up to his youngest son, Jack, to take over, and he doesn't want to do it. Jack has his own life, He owns a secondhand shop. He's an antiques dealer, and this is something I was just actually talking about with my roommate not that long ago. It I always thought that being into old stuff was just something everybody did. I didn't realize it was kind of a Gen X thing to be into like retro stuff, but it is, and it's kind of I would have been embarrassed by that, some time ago. And I don't think now. I mean, I don't know that many people my age, to be honest with you. And the ones I do know, I know from working at the comic book store. So obviously they're into retro or whatever the shit you want to call it. But yeah, that's the thing is like all this stuff that he mentioned, and like clearly Robinson was like a very hip guy, very Gen X himself. And so he makes a lot of very specific references to like Bakelite and shit like that. And I can't remember the name. There's a very specific designer of Hawaiian shirts that Jack collects and that he wears. But his uniform wasn't even like he wore a trench coat, which was in vogue in the 90s. And he's got these aviator goggles. He wears an old like Lone Ranger badge for the star. And he wears this Hawaiian shirt underneath. So it's very 90s. It's very hip. He's got tattoos and stuff when that was still new. I mean, it's goofy, but it's of my time. It's just and it's like I'm saying, it's of my time, but it's not embarrassing. Thank God I didn't grow up in the 70s. Also, mostly drawn by Tony Harris. I mean, you're not going to see much of the art from Howlin' Flip, but Tony Harris is an incredible artist, and I had honestly forgotten that he'd drawn that book. It was the first thing I knew him from. He would go on to do a book called Ex Machina with Brian K. Vaughan, which was also very popular and extremely good. His art was even better. I mean, his art's really good here, but by Ex Machina, he'd gotten even better. But seeing his old art again, I don't know. It was just a real, real nice trip down memory lane. And like I've been, it's been a motif here lately into 90s stuff and how terrible it is. But this is a 90s book that's very good. So I almost don't know what to do with myself. Cook dinner, that's what I'm going to do with myself right now. Okay, I really hope the sound's okay. I guess we'll both find out. All right, bye.